And welcome back to a brand new series of Play Chess. If you followed us in our last series, you've started from the beginner stage right up through to an understanding of what combinational chess was all about. I hope that you've been studying at home and looking at your beginner's books, and that you've been playing also. What we have lined up now for the next few weeks is an advanced course that will teach you the evolution of chess ideas. And we'll be discussing the great chess giants of history, the Paul Morphys, the Steinitzes, the Laskers, Tarishes, Capablancas, right up to Bobby Fischer, Korchnoi, and Karpov. And through these players and their genius, we'll be able to see the ideas, the very subtle ideas that they injected into our game to make the game the art form that it is today. So this will be more or less a course in chess appreciation. I'm not going to teach you how to play chess. I'm going to teach you now how to appreciate the game of chess, so that you'll be able to pick up a book from a magazine store and you'll be able to appreciate going over a master's game. Now remember, we left off our last series talking about combinational themes and what the nature of a combination was. And we are right up into the early 1800s. And we talked about Adolf Anderssen, who was the German math professor, who was the master of combinational and tactical chess. Let's remember there were two aspects of combinational play in those days. There was the combination that was due to the opponent's blunder, outright error, and there was the combination due to positional characteristics. Just to bring you up to date, you all know what a blunder is in chess. You make them all the time. I make them all the time. Let's discuss what is a combination that arises out of positional characteristics. We'll look at a short game. I'll set up a position. This is known as the Cole system for anyone who might be interested. And I'm going to play these moves very fast. You all know the moves by now and why they're played. The knight will come out here hoping to push this pawn up in the center to get a head duo, we called it. Say the knight comes up here, and now we push the pawn. And after pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, knight takes knight, and bishop takes knight. Let's say black plays out here to protect in case bishop takes knight. Now let's look at this position very carefully. Both sides have castled. The pawn structures are sound. However, we notice that the knight that is usually placed here protecting the castle king side is missing. Black hasn't really made a really bad blunder, but the position calls for a combination. And the combination looks like this. It's known as Greco's sacrifice. It's bishop takes pawn, check, king takes. So it's a sacrifice of a bishop. Then the knight comes up, check. You notice the queen won't take the knight because it's protected by the bishop. And now we have several moves that black can play. Black can come back here. Black can come over here. Black can come up here. Black can come up to G6. This is what is characteristic of positional combinations. The calculations that you must make aren't as precise as they are in combinations which are due to blunders. So you're more or less going into a field, into an area of chess which has a gut feeling to it that there ought to be something there. You gave up a bishop. You exposed the king. The position suggests that there's something there. If the king should come back, in fact, there is something there, because the queen can come up, and regardless what happens, we're going to have a checkmate coming in here. If the king were to come up here instead, then white may move the queen up here with the threat of a discovered check, attacking the queen. Or perhaps the queen may come up here with a check and then switch over here and down here. So what I'm trying to point out simply is that the type of attack in this position is less precise, cannot be calculated out to the nth position, but if you're familiar with the scheme of the position, you know about the bishop sacrifice in this case. There are many positions which call for combinational chess to be played, and the only way you really get to become accustomed to them and to get to know them is to play a lot of chess, to see them in books, see how the masters treat them. Now, this was the style of chess that was played right up until the 1800s. The only player of note in the 18th century was Philidor, the great musician and chess player of France. But he was way ahead of his time. He wrote a book on pawn structure that is still valued today. But then there was, he was way ahead of his time, as I said. Then there were great tactical chess players. One of the strangest and most amazing was Howard Staunton of England. And he played in the famous divans of London, and they had their wonderful chess clubs in the early 1800s. And Howard Staunton, as a matter of fact, was the creator of the Staunton chess set that we know is the standard chess set that we use today. He was also the editor of the chess editor of the London Illustrated News, and a great player. He had his idiosyncrasies, and one of them was that he did not like to challenge players that he thought he might lose to, as we shall soon find out. But what he did, when he thought he was the best chess player in the world, he decided to hold the very first international chess tournament in London, and this was in 1851. And chess players were invited, the strongest chess players of the world that were then known, were invited to come to London, and the very first International Chess Congress was held there. He expected to win, of course. From France came famous men like La Bourdonnais and Deschapelles, who was famous also for bridge, if you're a bridge player, and Saint-Amand. And the Russians came, the Yugoslavs, the Dutch, a couple of Americans came over. And Staunton was doing quite well. However, the man who won the tournament quite easily was this Adolf Anderssen, the math professor and the very quiet, humble man from Germany. And he astounded everyone with the ease with which he won. He then went back to his native land and seemed to retire from chess. He came out of retirement about 20 years later, when he was challenged by a young American. And it's this young American that we must start our new series with. Before we mention him, I would like to tell you about a man by the name of Lowenthal, who was a great chess player in Budapest and doing quite well there until the Austrian army crushed that country, and he had to flee for his life. He was involved in politics. He emigrated to the United States, and he took on all comers in the United States. At the time, there were some great players like Louis Paulson and some others around. He toured the United States as a professional chess player, and he didn't have much trouble with anyone he met until he found his way down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. And there he met up with the Morphy family. And he stayed at their home. They were quite well-to-do. They took him in. They played chess all the time. Then he had a match with young Paul Morphy, the 12-year-old son of the chess player. And the young Paul Morphy soundly trounced the famous Lowenthal. This stunned the chess world, naturally, so much so that chess players flocked to New Orleans to see who this protege, in fact, was. Paul Morphy was born in 1837 and had a very short life. As you can see, he only lived for 47 years. He died in 1884. And he's an enigma in the annals of chess, and one cannot help but parallel his life to that of Bobby Fischer today. He took up law at the university in Louisiana, and he graduated 1 year earlier than he ought to have. There was a state law saying that you had to be 21 before you could practice law. He was 20 when he got his degree. So he had a year to kill, so to speak. He took that year to go to New York and play in the very first American chess tournament, which he won. And then he traveled with the money that was left to him by his father, who had just passed away, and he traveled to England. And of course, he was out to take on all comers, and he wanted especially to play Howard Staunton. Howard Staunton wanted, in his column, he kept saying he was going to play Paul Morphy, but he was able always to postpone the match. Very frustrated, the young Paul took on everybody else and was the talk of the town London. He was just discouraged when he couldn't zero in on Howard Staunton, who kept evading him. He traveled over to France. He played some very famous games over there. And it was while he was over there that he challenged Adolf Anderssen, who was only too happy to play this young man from the United States. And it was, in fact, a memorable match between Paul Morphy and Adolf Anderssen. And Morphy won the match. And it's from this match between Anderssen and Morphy that we come to see the great change that had taken place at that moment in the theory of chess. We have the collision between two different minds when it comes to what chess is all about. We had Anderssen and his like on the continent, who were very great tacticians and played a wide open game, much like the games I've been showing you in the last series. Many of those games were taken from that period. Why was Paul Morphy able to win so easily against these giants of chess? That was the question. So people started to study Paul Morphy's games. To make a long story short, with Paul, he went back to England. He was still unable to play Howard Staunton. He returned to the United States, played a little while in New York, helped publish a chess bulletin with a man by the name of Fisk, and then went back to his native New Orleans, and he retired from chess. It's amazing, but the man who changed chess so much and gave so much to the world of chess had only 55 recorded games. We only have 55 of his games. And yet it was such a breakthrough in the theory of chess that he has truly become an immortal. He has a sad story from then to the end of his life. There's an interesting novel out written about him called The Chess Players. It's at the library if you're interested in the story of Paul Morphy. But let's study his games and try to understand what there was in his approach to chess that we can derive some benefit from. He was the first positional chess player. He understood the meaning of positional chess. In those days, everybody played the open game. As you know, you got your knights out, you got your bishops out, you gave up pawns in the opening in order to gain space and time, as we've said, and it was slam-bang tactical chess. Now, Morphy loved to play that style of chess, but he knew what to do with it better than the others. He derived principles as to how to play the open game. And it wasn't until chess students studied his games and learned what these principles were in positional chess that they were able to eventually draw games that became of the open style. And then future students, as we'll study, try to close the game up and they become locked positions to avoid the theory that Morphy had taught so soundly in his games. There are three main maxims in Morphy's games. The first, and it seems very obvious to us today, those of you who are chess players, because we grew up with these. As you've learned chess, you've learned these maxims. They're second nature to you now. But at the time in the 1850s, they were something new again. The first maxim is that in the opening, every move you make must be a developing move. Now, there was a very favorite opening called the Scotch Gambit, which was truly an open game of the day, where this center pawn was given up, not recaptured, in order that white may get fast development, like so. The bishop came up to give added protection to that pawn. Now, the knight then came up here. This is the way chess was played in those days. We would not move the same piece twice in the opening today. But in those days, if they saw an attack on f7 with two pieces, they went right after it. And the common way to protect that pawn was black would move here. Black would figure, well, now I have an extra pawn, an extra piece protecting the pawn. I'm attacking one of the attacking pieces. The knight is attacking the bishop. And even though, black is saying to himself, even though I am moving a piece twice, so did white, so nothing is lost. But then, let's look at, this is the, as I say, this was the way this is the way the opening went in those days. There was a combination to be played down here. And the games usually went like this. It looks as though the knight is giving itself up, but in reality it isn't. Knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, check, king takes knight. Black is up a piece, however, the combination is this. Check, and wins back the piece. So after this, to get out of the check, queen takes bishop. And what has happened is that white has won back the material. White will win this pawn. That's the key thing. White will win this pawn. There's no convenient way of black to protect it. Black can try to protect it. The black king is also robbed of any defense right there. But if the knight comes out, the knight can be pushed. This knight can always come out here and attack it again, so double up on it. There are many ways of recapturing that pawn. Notice the double pawn, and it's weak. Let's look at that little combination again and see how Paul Morphy handled it as black. Here we are, and we'll set up the position. Every move must be a developing move. This is the first maxim that we're dealing with. The bishop comes out. Now, Paul Morphy is playing black. He's protecting this pawn. White comes up here protecting this. Now, Paul Morphy, instead of protecting this pawn with this knight, Paul Morphy says, well, that is wrong. If I am going to move a piece, it must be a piece I haven't moved yet. If I'm going to move a piece and develop it, it must be a piece that has not already been moved. Every move in the opening must be a developing move. He wants to protect this, so he protects it this way. Now, for those of you who have followed the series so far, you realize that a knight on the side seems weak. But Morphy goes a little bit deeper in understanding the position. Because now let's look at our combination that white wants to play. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes knight. Bishop takes knight. Check. King takes bishop. Queen comes out here, says check. Pawn up. It's the same game except black has this pawn protected. Black has that pawn protected. It makes all the difference in the world. And we'll show in our next talk Perhaps we'll play this game on a little further, but I want to show you another principle. But you see the difference. It looks as though black is wide open, but I'll show you how black gets out of it. Morphy played this game as black. After he started pushing the queen around, he was able to develop very quickly and get a good attack on white. But the difference in the two is that Morphy brought his knight out to the side for the combination rather than moving this knight away, leaving this unprotected. Every move in the opening must be a developing move. A lot of players in those days would make moves and move their queen around several times in the opening, one or two other pieces around several times. They didn't pay much attention to that maxim. But that was the first thing we learned from Paul Morphy. The second maxim is that the side with a better development should strive for an open game. In other words, if you have more force out in the field, you should try and open the game wide open because you have more material out there. Conversely, if you don't have the better development, you should try and keep the game closed up. Try and keep it closed up. Okay? Let's look at a little game that Morphy played as white, and it'll give you an idea between the new ideas and the old ideas. It was an Evans gambit, which develops like this, in which Morphy gives up a pawn for development. It's a gambit. It was well known in those days. We don't play this nowadays. We play back here, but this was played. I'm setting up this situation like so. Morphy castles and pawn to queen 3 to open up the bishop. Just look at the position very carefully. You can see that Morphy is castled already. Black hasn't developed in order to castle yet. Morphy has the broad center, but he's down a pawn. He's down force, but he has a great position. He then brings out this knight, which looks logical enough, and black, true to the style of the combinational players, pre-Morphy, moves a piece twice in order to get rid of this bishop. The bishop simply comes back in here. But this piece has moved to the corner. You see that? Bishop queen 3, and then, true to the style of combinational players, a pin on the knight. He should have probably played knight out somewhere so that he could castle early. But let's get our pieces out, do the pinnings, throw those tactical themes in there. Morphy continues to develop, like so. And black, also true to the style, queen to bishop 3, because now he's attacking this pawn with two pieces. You see? Queen to bishop, and also threatening to double up in here. Well, after the queen to bishop 3, which is a bad move, because why attack when you haven't developed your pieces yet? This is what Morphy said. Why do it? Every move in the opening should be a developing move. He's not developed yet, so you don't attack. Okay? But now the position calls for an attack. He's well developed. He's castled. He's got his pieces out. He's cramped. The second maxim is a side with a better development, obviously white, should look for an open game. He goes for it. Attacking the queen, attacking the bishop. Something has to be done with the queen, obviously. The queen comes back here. A waste of time from before. That's in case this moves to protect this pawn also. Queen back to queen 1. Now we force the issue here. We force an open game, you see? The side with the better development forces an open game. Notice how the game's becoming more and more open, and black is constricted. Black will try to keep the game closed, but he doesn't know enough to do that. He just wants to mix it up with tactical chess. Morphy is playing positional chess. He opens up, finally, to the correct square, wanting to castle. However, now I'd like to introduce you to an idea of time. Whenever you're up in time, it's a suggestion to go in the immediate attack. The way you count time is to count how many moves it would take to get into this position. Not the actual moves, but how many moves it could take you. For instance, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tempi for, I go like that because castling, 9 tempi for white. Let's count black's time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. White is up in tempi, a great deal. If you're up 1 or 2, it's a great deal. Now we're up 4 in time. So there ought to be a direct attack. If you're up in time, look for the attack. Here's the attack. We pin this knight, double, triple pin, but we've left this pawn unprotected. Black comes in and takes that pawn, attacking the rook, and also protecting this knight. So did Morphy make a mistake by giving this up? No. Morphy wants to open up the game. He's got the better development. Second maxim, better development, open up the game. He pushes. Takes the rook over with the absolute pin, right? The king's there. Black feels satisfied. He can get out of that very easily by castling right away. What happens now? Morphy, with one of his typical exchanges where he gives up a rook for a bishop. Look at the way the game goes so quickly. So quickly. Check. Bishop takes. Attacks this queen. Now regardless what happens to the queen has to move somewhere or be taken. The queen moves somewhere and mate to follow. Check. Check. Mate. Now I know I'm going through this very fast, and it might be difficult for some of you to follow the actual moves. It's interesting that in the last series, people were commenting that some people said I went too fast, other people said I went too slow, and I tried to go as slowly as I could in order to get the fundamentals in. What have we done so far with Paul Morphy? We have looked at two examples, two theoretical examples of how he changed people's conception of positional chess from simply purely combinational chess to one of true positional chess for the open game. For the open game, mind you. And they were that every move in the opening must be a developing move. Don't move the same piece twice in your first 6, 7 moves. In the opening, every move should be to get more force out towards the center, if possible. The second maxim was the side with a better development should try to rip open the game. And the side that isn't well developed should try and keep it closed. The third principle we'll discuss next time. I'll see you then. Thank you.
except for the memory of how they were answered by you. But there never seems to be enough time to do the